6.5 minutes.
And I welcome the opportunity to join this debate today on behalf of Labour. And it's timely, clearly, following the conclusion of COP26. And although many of us might have mixed feelings about what was agreed on COP26, undoubtedly some progress was made, not perhaps as much as we would have liked, but certainly the onus is now on countries like our own to deliver on the climate commitments made. And I indeed welcomed the recent publication of the Government's Climate Action Plan, which, as we know, sets out 475 separate actions leading to the necessary emissions reductions that we have committed to. In other words, to halve our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And it includes provision for extensive offshore wind power, the retrofitting of 500,000 homes, and other targets like the putting of 1 million electric vehicles on Irish roads by 2030. Ambitious targets, but necessary ones, which we very much welcomed. But without sight of the detailed annex, Minister, which you refer to, which will be apparently shortly published to support delivery of the plan, without sight of that annex, it's very difficult to see how we can achieve those targets. What are the steps that are to be taken? And I'm mindful of the Climate Change Advisory Council's clear recommendation that it's in the next 2 to 3 years that we need to see the necessary investment to develop the infrastructure around, for example, offshore wind generation, around EV charging, that infrastructure that will help us deliver on those more ambitious yearly reductions, the targets that we've set ourselves for the latter half of this decade, up to 2030. So there are huge questions as to how we can meet the targets, as to what are the steps that are going to be taken, and whether government is serious about meeting those targets. And this is causing immense frustration, clearly, among all of those affected, all of us, householders who are looking to do retrofitting, farmers who aren't clear on agriculture targets, and those who are still awaiting decent, active and public transport infrastructure. And indeed, in my own area in Dublin Bay South, huge frustration at the delays built into the Bus Connects and the National Transport Authority plans, and I know that's a frustration that's felt across Dublin, but certainly in Dublin Bay South, I'm communicated with daily by constituents who are looking to do the right thing, who want to move to active travel, who want, if they have a car, who want to switch to an EV, to an electric vehicle, and who are stymied because unless you're lucky enough to have a driveway, and there are many areas like my own in Portobello where most households do not have driveways, where most parking is on-street parking, and where there are simply not enough publicly accessible EV chargers to make it feasible or practical for many people to switch to EVs. So I'm frustrated by trying to ensure that we see the greater provision of EV chargers that are publicly accessible in areas across Dublin Bay South, and I can see the frustration experienced by many who want to do the right thing but have simply not been given a clear pathway to do it through the lack of the development of the infrastructure. And it's very hard to see how we meet that target in transport, for example, of putting 1 million EVs on Irish roads, or indeed meeting our targets of fewer journeys, of significantly fewer journeys by car, if we don't build and put in the infrastructure. And I won't even start on the difficulties of getting pedestrian crossings and better facilities for cyclists and pedestrians in my area. So there is frustration there. And I note in your own speech, Minister, you talk about retrofitting. Again, frustrating delays here, where you say the activity level to date is not sufficient for our ambition. And I think that sums up, unfortunately, a real lack of urgency, a really serious delays that have been built into our processes, and we need to address those as a matter of urgency, because we need to see that sort of urgent and radical response driving governments around the world when it comes to climate change. The Taoiseach himself acknowledged this in his address to COP26 when he said that every second of delay makes the task to cut emissions that bit bigger, and of course he's right. The crisis is cumulative, and when we wait to take action, as we all know, the problem gets worse. But unfortunately, we have seen these sort of substantial and significant delays built in, and it does mean then that there's a lack of clarity about how we meet those targets. And as I've said, we urgently need the investment in the infrastructure now. So we saw delays in the publication of the Climate Action Plan itself, and I've addressed those in previous debates in this House. It was disappointing, for example, that it was not aligned with the fiscal budget as had been initially promised. And as we know, we're well into the key decade in which we have to put in place the infrastructure to reduce our targets, to reduce our emissions by half by 2030. But in addition to putting those measures in place, we do also need to see, and again, maybe this will be in the annex, what are the vital redistributive measures? What are the measures that will deliver the just transition, that will bring the public with us, that will ensure that those who might be adversely affected by necessary measures, that they will be given the necessary supports. And that's what we mean by just transition. We've seen through the pandemic the value of state intervention, of the public service and of collective solidarity. And that sense of the importance of the public services and of the public sector has been reflected in recent election results, where we've seen parties of the left winning in Germany and Norway and elsewhere, with a growing consciousness of the need for that strong collective solidarity to also weigh in behind our response to climate change. So it's through that sort of solidarity, through the empowerment of ordinary people and through effective communication and clear communication that we will bring society with us on meeting those targets. And then we'll all reap the benefits, clearly, of a world in which a better society is possible, with cleaner air, warmer homes, better infrastructure and support for biodiversity. Labour are willing to play a constructive role, and indeed we are doing that in opposition, Minister. I've put forward, as you know, the bill on carbon labelling, and I was glad the government did not oppose that. I'm also putting forward a bill on Dublin Bay to try and introduce a statutory authority for Dublin Bay to improve the governance of Dublin Bay, to ensure that we don't see the sort of developments we saw this week with algae growing across the water, and real concerns among sea swimmers and others who use the wonderful amenity, as I do, as so many of us do, real concerns that there isn't any really proper or adequate monitoring of water quality in Dublin Bay. So it's that sort of initiative that we propose to take. And we'll also be introducing, Minister, a right to repair bill with measures to stop waste and to tackle the cost of living by requiring manufacturers of digital electronic equipment to make available repair information to consumers. So we want to work with you in a whole range of ways to ensure that we do meet those ambitious but necessary climate targets, and to ensure that we achieve that just transition that is also so crucial. Guramagat.